Hello and welcome to the Valley today. I am your host, Janet Michael. We've got a bit of a twist on our show today. Katie Cooper is here from the Luray-Page Chamber of Commerce. And no, it's not Tourism Tuesday.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
I know, right? Are you still going to do your...
Woohoo!
So we're going to dub today Fun Friday.
I love it.
Because I think it's great. And, you know, we're going to be talking to Shenandoah National Park people.
Yeah, and what's not fun about that?
Yeah, duh. What better place to go and have fun, especially now that it's about to get beautiful. Not that it's not always, but it's about to get colorful. Maybe that's
right.
What I should say.
That's right. Orange is about to appear everywhere.
I know. It's so beautiful. I love it. It's my favorite time. So, Katie, the reason that we are all here and we're here on a Friday, not necessarily for Tourism Tuesday, is the Chamber a couple of weeks ago, it may actually be a couple of months ago now.
It is, yeah. Time flies.
It does. See, it's because we're timeless.
Right.
That's what we're going to go
That's
with.
It.
But you guys were doing this really cool workshop, and I had gotten the email from the Chamber saying that you were doing this really cool workshop in partnership with Shenandoah National Park, and you were offering it to your Chamber members, most of the ones that were in the tourism-related industry, to kind of educate them. So tell me how this all happened.
Yeah, so actually it was called Shenandoah National Park Tourism Community Workshop, so very self-explanatory, right? But what happened was we had seen that the park was partnering with Harrisonburg to do a very, very similar, basically same wording and everything for the flyer, workshop over there, and we were going to send some of our staff members. But we thought, you know, not just being a gateway to the national park, but actually the home to the national park, we should definitely look into bringing one to Luray and Page County. So we reached out and we talked to these lovely ladies, and they agreed to come.
So you had a lot of people that showed up for this.
Yes. Yeah. We think we had over 25 people, and there was a lot of interest in the community afterwards once those 25 went back and started telling about what they learned. So we're discussing maybe the spring doing another one.
Having another one. Awesome. Well, maybe we should let them talk.
Yeah, I
think that
that'd
might
be
be a good idea. So joining us in the studio today, and I probably should have asked before, so forgive me, Emily Guss. Okay, yes. I got that one right. She is a park ranger in interpretive education. Yeah, we were throwing around all kinds of different descriptive words for your title.
Yes.
And you were the one that actually put on the workshop at the Luray Chamber.
I was, yes.
Awesome. And then Sally Hurlbert. Yeah, Sally's here. Hurlbert is here. She is a management specialist with Shenandoah National Park. And I'm excited that we were able to kind of figure out a way to get you guys here. So, Emily, I'm going to start with you. Katie told us a little bit about what the workshop was, but I want to drill down a little bit more because I think a lot of people don't fully understand the magnitude of Shenandoah National Park. So tell me first, what is a national park?
Well, that's a good question.
It's a loaded question.
Yes, it is a loaded question and a pretty big question. Actually, when you ask the general public what a national park is, you'll get all kinds of answers. You'll get things from, well, maybe it's a zoo or a wildlife refuge, or maybe it has slides and roller coasters, you know. But I think most people do understand that a national park is a natural area usually, or a historical area, something that is set aside by the federal government to protect both the wildlife and the vegetation and all the history and the culture and the stories behind that area. And so that is a big part of a national park. But we also are mandated not just to protect them, but also to provide enjoyment for our visitors to enjoy all of those things safely, both for the park and for the visitors. So it's a pretty big mandate. It's a pretty big job for a national park. And something like Shenandoah, which gets a lot of visitors a year, is definitely a pretty big job for all of us that love our national parks. And that's one other thing that we always make sure to explain when we talk about national parks. It's not just my national park because I'm a park ranger that works there. It's actually a national park for all of us because it's a national park and it's part of the federal government. And we, the people, are the federal government. So actually we all own our national parks. We own 417 of the most beautiful, most amazing, most unique places in the United States. But that ownership comes along with, you know, privileges, but also with responsibilities. And so we kind of call it more of a steward. We're a steward for our national parks, where we take care of them for now and the future. And so that's another big part of being a national park, is it's not just for now, it's also for the future.
So you're kind of like our management company or the landlord, so to speak.
We try.
So how big is Shenandoah National Park? Is it like 300 million zillion miles?
It's 200,000 acres.
Wow.
About 300 square miles. And our iconic feature, which is Skyline Drive, which goes through the middle of the park, is 105 miles long.
Wow.
Starts at mile 0 in Front Royal and goes all the way to 105 down near Waynesboro.
So how is it, Katie, that you as a Luray person gets to say we're the home of the park and yet the drive starts here in Front Royal?
Well, that's because we have the Shenandoah National Park headquarters in Luray at the base of the mountain.
Thought I was going to get you.
No, sorry.
So
Luray is our special home place.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Although I do love Luray. So, I'm not going to slight them at all. So, let me ask you this, Emily. What is the difference? We talked about this briefly earlier. What's the difference between a national park and a national forest? Aren't they all the same thing?
Unfortunately, or I shouldn't even say unfortunately, but truthfully, no, they're not the same thing. They are both governed by different agencies and by different departments in the government. The National Park Service is under the Department of Interior, and so we deal more with protection and preservation and keeping our land as untouched as possible. While the National Forest is a place that is under the Department of Agriculture, so even just that word right there shows that it's more about land use. So it's more about land use and conservation, and so that is a very different philosophy. Now, do we need both of those lands? Yes, absolutely. Both of those lands are very important. They just have different mandates, different rules. And it gets confusing because a lot of national parks are surrounded by national forests. So we have visitors that come back and forth between both of them and sometimes get confused about the rules. So that was actually part of the workshop, was talking about the differences between them and what you can and can't do in each of those different kinds of locations.
Well, and that makes sense because in theory, both are full of trees.
Yes.
But
and rivers and
all of
animals.
all of that kind of stuff. So, but it's kind of interesting though, the difference between the two. And do you get a lot of questions from people that are, well, I don't understand, why can't I take my ATV, for example, in the park, or is that allowed in one and not the other?
That is something we get a lot of questions for. I would say I get more questions about mountain biking and about horseback riding, which you can do horseback riding in both national forests and national parks. In Shenandoah, there are certain trails that you are allowed to be on. I also get a lot of questions about dogs. And Shenandoah is a dog-friendly park in the sense that most trails you're allowed to have your dog as long as it's on a 6-foot leash. But some national parks, you're not allowed to bring your dogs in for most trails. So it just depends on the national park also sometimes about the rules. Where in national forest, a lot of times you can bring your dog into the national forest. Again, I'm kind of, I guess, being vague because it depends on which location you're in and each rule. So every time you enter any of those places, it's good for you to know what the rules are at each place.
Well, and where would you, as just a regular tourist, where would you find out what those rules are? I mean, do you find that in the scope of researching this trip that you're going to make to one of the parks? Do you wait till you get there?
Research. We would really love if our visitors were able to research before they came to any of these areas. And I'm sure you can ask any national park or national forest or anything. We would love if our visitors researched ahead of time. That is not always the case, and that's not always even possible. So, there are visitor centers, there are Chamber of Commerces, there are all kinds of ways. Even when you're driving on, for example, I-81, there's the visitor center when you cross over the state line. So all of those places are great ways to get information. If you're researching ahead, of course, you can call any of us. You can check our website. You can check our social media. I don't know, Susan, do you have anything? Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and the answer book, which is what these workshops are all about. So this is something that we are now providing to the local chambers, to the businesses, to have a book right there in front of them that is really set up very similar to our website. So you don't have to have a computer to access to get the information. It's right here in the book.
Well, and that makes a lot of sense because a lot of times, and Katie can attest to this, these are the people that are on the front lines sometimes before they even get to Skyline Drive or to the entrance to the park. They enter the town where all of this stuff starts, but they're not really sure what they're going to do. We're just going to go here. We're going to start here and figure it out as we go.
Right.
So it makes it a whole lot easier that you guys will have some of these books.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And now that we've got them in the community, it makes it even easier.
And that was a big goal, like Sally said, for our workshops, was to be able to get these answer books out to the communities and to get their contact information so we can send out updates and keep them updated and just be able to communicate more with our surrounding communities.
Sweet. So I tell you what, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about what some of the answers are. We can do some of the questions and some of the answers. And Sally, I want to make sure we talk a little bit too about the economic impact, because I think that too is a lot of times overlooked. I know as, people who live in areas that get, inundated with tourists, we call them peepers in Front Royal. Sometimes we get annoyed, but don't think about the economic impact that those tourists have on our local economies, the money that they're spending. Felicia's talked about it for Tourism Tuesday. Katie, you've talked about it as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we come back too.
That's great.
Awesome.
Sure.
Well, we are going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Katie Cooper. She's with the Luray-Page Chamber of Commerce. Sally and Emily are also here from Shenandoah National Park. So we're going to talk more about that when we come back to the Valley Today. Expecting to hear a commercial? Well, that's kind of what this is. First, I want to thank you for listening to the Valley Today podcast. You're one of many who listen to the show this way. Sometimes it's because our listeners didn't know that if they're away from the radio, they can still listen on our website, via the TuneIn app on their phone, or even on Alexa. We're also available in the Apple Podcast app and the Google Play Music app. Sometimes our listeners are just busy and they want to listen when it fits their schedule. Or maybe it's a guest of the show who want to hear what they sounded like when they were on the radio. We even have a few binge listeners who listen to a week's worth at a time. So if you want those people, your potential customers, to hear your message, your ad could have been here. And the bonus, your commercial isn't restricted to just 30 or 60 seconds. You can take up to 2 minutes to talk to those customers. There's even the opportunity to be the exclusive sponsor of the Valley Today podcast, which gets you on-air mentions at the end of every show. If all of this sounds interesting to you, give me a call at the station, 540-635-4121, or send me an email to janet@theriver953.com. You can also find all of my contact info by searching Janet Michael on our website at theriver953.com. So do one of those things. Get in touch and let me tell you how we can talk to those customers in this podcast every single day. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Valley Today. I am your host, Janet Michael, and this segment is brought to you by Valley Health, offering the latest minimally invasive surgery advancements. You can learn more at valleyhealthlink.com/MIS. So we are having a fascinating conversation, I have to say, with Katie. That's who you are.
Yes.
Katie.
Yeah. Hi.
It's so weird because it's Friday and you're here on a Friday.
I know. I just like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. So Katie Cooper is here from the Luray-Page Chamber of Commerce. She has brought with her Emily and Sally from the Shenandoah National Park. We've been talking about a workshop that Luray Chamber recently offered to its chamber members and tourism-related industry partners about how to know what's going on at the park, be able to be educated when people come in and ask. Yeah. You guys had a great success with that.
We did, yeah. We were having a little bit of a slower turnout, because a lot of people are last-minute planners, which we know. So Clancy called around the morning of, and she called our retail places and a lot of the lodging places and was like, this is what you need to know so you can show your customers and your guests where to go, and you can, be informed about everything that's going on. And we had a great turnout.
Well, and Emily, you were saying before we came into the studio that you had some goals for doing these workshops. There were some things that you wanted to make sure that knowledge that you imparted out to the people that were participating. What were some of those things?
Yes, definitely. Our biggest goals, I would say, were we wanted to provide orientation and education for our communities, along with creating just better communication with our communities, more engagement with our local communities, and then, of course, give them these tools, which includes the answer book, but then also show our website and our different resources, and even us as park rangers as resources that the community can use to reach out when they have questions for these visitors that come into the local community looking for, their answers to get into Shenandoah National Park. So that was kind of a big, lofty goal, but I believe that from our workshops, we've actually held 3. Luray's was the most recent one, and I believe that they were very successful. We had audiences from the visitor centers that are all in the surrounding areas, especially some of the volunteers, Appalachian Trail volunteers. We had local businesses like hotels and cabins and restaurants, and even some of the recreation areas. And we had local agency employees, and then also, of course, chamber staff. So we had a lot of variety in our workshop. So it was, I think, a pretty good success.
I would wholeheartedly agree.
Well, and you got a lot of feedback. Katie, you were telling me that as people were leaving at the end of the workshop, they were overwhelmed and tickled to death that they had all of this new information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what business doesn't want to better serve their customers? And it's all about this.
Well, and it's one of those things where sometimes we think we know information, but we just
Right.
don't realize we don't know what we don't know. And there's so much information about the National Park Service as a whole. And Emily, you were joking because you said one part of your presentation included some of the most common questions from park visitors. And so tell me, what is the most common question that you guys get asked?
You know the answer.
I
I already
do.
told you, but I said that I lead in saying, "What do you think is the most common question for us?" And most people will say, "Well, where are the bears?" or "How do I go for this hike?" or whatever. But really, no. Honestly, the biggest question we get is, "Where are the bathrooms?"
That's a pretty important question.
It's a very important question, but if you're a park ranger, you need to know that answer, and you need to know where the closest one is.
Yes, so yeah, you gotta have to have a map in your head at all times, no matter where you are, to just kind of figure
And
it
a
out.
lot of times, my answer is out the door to the right. And it's amazing how many times I've said that in my life. So.
So, are there other questions? I mean, that kind of makes sense, but you wouldn't think of that being a common question. But when people come into the park, I mean, are there questions that you get over and over again?
We do. We get a lot of the same kind of, we say generalized 10 questions, and it is everything from where are the bathrooms, basic orientation, like how do I get to Skyline Drive, where is the visitor center, how late is everything open, all of those things. How do I make a reservation? So some of those basic, more orientation questions. We also get some more in depth, like where do you find the bears? When's a good time to see them? Where's a good time to see them?
How far away should I stay from them?
Yeah. So some of those questions, and of course the hiking. I mean, we have over 500 miles of trails. Wow. But we also get visitors coming that hike the whole Appalachian Trail. So we have an interesting variety of hikers in the park. So we get backpackers, we get day hikers, we get Appalachian Trail through hikers. So we have a lot of that variety. So some of those can get to be more in depth kind of questions when we're planning out backcountry trips for people and filling out their backcountry permits and things. So, Sally, do you have anything else to add about most common questions?
Yeah, and actually we get a lot of questions from visitors who want to know where they can go eat in the local communities outside of the park, or what is there to do outside of the park. So we're real happy to tell them that there's lots of restaurants, there's lots of fun recreational activities that they can do when they depart the park.
And
Which
all the
we all
restaurants have
love.
bathrooms.
That's right.
Yes.
So it all ties in. So this is kind of really interesting for you, Emily, because you're coming out into the communities to try and say, hey, here are all of the things that happen at the park. Here are all the things that we offer. Here's what you can and can't do. Here's how we're different and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you're kind of getting an education in these communities from the people who attend that say, oh, well, don't forget to tell them if they want to know where to eat. We've got, 3 Mexican restaurants and an Italian place and a burger joint and all of that sort of thing. You kind of pick up a little bit of education along the way yourself, I would imagine.
I do. I will make one caution, though, and this is something that all federal employees will tell you, is we can't show any preferential treatment about each restaurant or about each hotel or anything like that. But we can say, like you just said, we have, 3 restaurants of this version or whatever it might be, as long as we're including all of the different types of restaurants or hotels or different things. Saying Luray has a plethora of all of those things, every type that you would want.
Just go check it out.
Tell Katie Emily sent you.
It does confuse visitors sometimes when they ask me, what's your favorite restaurant? And I really truthfully cannot tell them that. So
yeah. Well, and that kind of, Katie, you understand that too from a chamber perspective, because, that's one of the benefits of being a chamber member. If you're not a chamber member and you fix pianos and somebody calls the chamber and says, hey, I got a broken piano, can you tell me where I should go to get it fixed? You, in theory, can say, I'm sorry, we don't have any members that fix pianos, even if there's one next door to the chamber.
Yeah, we usually don't do that. If there isn't a competitor that's a chamber member, we usually give them the information anyway.
You're so much nicer than me. I would say, I'm sorry, we don't have any
But
of
I
those.
understand not showing favoritism. We try at the chamber as well in the visitor center to give a variety of options so as not to pigeonhole. Yeah.
Well, and you guys also have, I'm looking at your list. You've titled them in your PowerPoint presentation, cultural resources. Skyline Drive, obviously. I used Skyline Drive in a trivia contest a couple of weeks ago. We were giving away tickets to something, and I put out there for somebody to guess when it was built and when it opened and how long it took and all that sort of thing. So that's kind of fascinating. But you have camps and little local, things, right? I know I'm using the very technical term
Little
there,
things.
things.
No, I mean, some of our cultural resources that I had pointed out is that Skyline Drive is kind of unique. It's actually on the National Register of Historic Places, which is pretty unique for a drive to be on that. And then, yes, we did have 6 CCC camps that were in the park, and also Rapidan Camp, which is the summer White House of Hoover. And so that's kind of an interesting one. And then, of course, Massanutten Lodge, which is at Skyland. Those were just some of the ones I pointed out, but there's way more than just those 4 things to point out historical-wise that are in Shenandoah. It has a rich history.
Well, and so speaking of way more than what she can actually point out, we're going to take a quick break. But we know now from having our conversation that there is way more we need to talk about that we're not going to be able to fit into the next 4 or 5 minutes that we have left on the show. So we are, if it's okay with you ladies, we're going to continue the conversation when we're done on the air.
Great.
So we'll be able to, if you're listening to on the website later or to the podcast, you'll be able to hear the whole thing if you guys can hang out for a little bit longer.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Awesome. Well, we're going to take a quick break right now. We'll come back and we'll get some contact information so that you can figure out where everything is, where you can follow the national park on all their different social media outlets, things like that. And then I do still want to have that conversation with you, Sally, about the economic impact.
Sure.
So we will do all of that. If not when we come back, at least when we're done with the show and in the After the Show podcast. So hang in there for just a few more minutes. I'm Janet Michael, and you are listening to The Valley Today.
There's always more to the story. At the River 95.3, that's what our new podcast, Another Look, offers. A deeper look into the news stories you hear about every week. I'm Dylan Nichols, news director at the River 95.3. Join Janet Michael from The Valley Today and I as we review news from our area, as well as some odd news stories from around the country. You can find Another Look on the river953.com and listen to our take on the news whenever, wherever. Another Look offering you a weekend review with a twist. You can find a new one every Friday in the Apple Podcast app, in the Google Play Music app, or online at theriver953.com.
Welcome back to The Valley Today. I am your host, Janet Michael, and this segment is brought to you by Valley Health Urgent Care. Can't wait to see a doctor? Now you don't have to. You can even check in online and save time at vhurgentcare.com. So we have got a couple of minutes left in the studio. It is not Tourism Tuesday. It is Fun Friday.
That's right. That is right.
So Katie Cooper is here from the Luray-Page Chamber of Commerce. We've been talking with Emily and Sally from the Shenandoah National Park. All of this kind of spawned from this really cool workshop that the Chamber hosted a couple of months ago for locals to get to know the park.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do you think they did?
Yes, I do. I think it worked. I think it was a huge success, just like Emily said.
So, Emily, if somebody was listening today, and we're going to keep talking, Sally and I are going to have a conversation too when we're done about the economic impact. But if somebody's listening, we mentioned earlier in the show that some of the best things that you can do when you're planning a trip is to do a little research. So, where would people go to do some research about Shenandoah National Park or any of the parks in the system?
That's a great question. And honestly, the best I would say would be our website because it has everything laid out and it's very, cleanly laid out so that you are able to know what, where you want to go, what you want to do, all those different things. And so our official website is www.nps for National Park Service.gov for government /SHEN for Shenandoah. Now, all national parks actually have a very similar website, and so it would be that first whole part, and then the last 4 letters would be different based off of each national park. For example, Yosemite would be YOSE, and Yellowstone would be YELL. So it's just all very similar, but those are our official sites. There are many other sites out there sometimes that do not always contain the most updated information.
Pseudo-park sites.
Yes. So it's important, I would say, to do that. But that we even have trail maps on there. We have all the information about making reservations, backcountry permits, places to eat, things to do. All of those things are on our website. We also have an active social media on Facebook, and we're working on some Twitter and eventually into other social medias. And then we also have phones that you can also use.
What?
There is occasionally a live person you can sometimes reach, and that would be 540-999-3500, and then the Visitor Center extension is 3283. And that would be at Big Meadows Visitor Center. But there is also, I don't know off the top of my head, to the front desk at the headquarters building.
It's option 1, I think.
Option 1. Okay. Sorry about that. I should know that because I staff the front desk sometimes.
Yeah, but you're not always calling yourself.
I'm the live ranger you sometimes get.
Well, I do know that there are still pages and pages. I'm looking through this. There are rules to remember. I want to touch on those in the after the show. I want to talk again, like I said earlier, with Sally about the economic impact. And you have nonprofit park partners.
Yes,
I follow a lot of them on Twitter. The Shenandoah National Park Trust, the National Park Association. You mentioned the Appalachian Trail, so we can talk a little bit about those and how important those partnerships are too in the podcast. But we're going to wrap up today's show. Katie, if somebody wants more information about the chamber,
Absolutely. It's visit Luray-Page.com.
oh, that's
Just
easy.
check it all out.
Awesome. Well, we are going to continue the conversation, but we're going to be done on the air right now. So I do want to remind you, because I'm sure everybody has forgotten already, it is Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's Friday, and it's going to be a
right,
beautiful
woohoo.
weekend. Yes, you're woohoo. But there are 3 events that you need to know that are happening this weekend. One of them is Art at the Mill. It's going on in Millwood. Nathan was here a couple of weeks ago and talked about that, so you can do a search for Art at the Mill on our website at theriver953.com and get more information. Oktoberfest at Winchester Brew Works is happening tomorrow. And then also tomorrow, the Children's Business Fair is going on the downtown walking mall. We talked about that on Monday, as a matter of fact, so you can do a search for that. That's where I'm going to go. I'm going to go spend my birthday
That sounds
talking to
cool.
these kids that want to be entrepreneurs that have set up little businesses
That's
up and down the
awesome.
downtown mall in
Wow.
Winchester. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'll be back here, though, on Monday talking with Cindy from the Laurel Center. So I hope you'll join me there. Have a great weekend. Welcome back to the Valley today after the show. I want to thank you for hanging in there with us. Katie Cooper, she's still here.
Yes, I am.
And so is Emily, and as well as Sally from the Shenandoah National Park. So, Emily, I'm going to start with you. I know I told Sally during the break I was going to come to her, but then it just occurred to me. So when I did the initial introduction of you on the air, I introduced you as a park ranger, and then we had a brief discussion about interpretive education. Explain to me what your title is and what that actually means.
So most of us, when you say park ranger, a lot of us think of a law enforcement park ranger, one that wears the belt with the gun and deals more with anybody speeding.
Of course, and that's usually how it works, yeah. And I can cut that out, so.
Great, because you need to. I knew this was going to happen. I've had this tickle.
Take your time.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to ask you the question over again.
Okay.
Now you're good.
I am good. Sorry about that.
So, Emily, when we were getting started, you told me your title was park ranger, but then we talked about interpretive, we talked about education. What do you do? What exactly is your title, and what does that mean?
Good question. And that is something that I think confuses a lot of people, because when you think of a park ranger, a lot of times you think of the law enforcement park ranger, the one that drives the car with the big lights like a police, or wears a belt that has a gun on it.
Game warden, things like that.
Yeah. And that is definitely a park ranger. But we also have park rangers that have many other different kinds of jobs. My job is more of an educational park ranger, where I'm dealing more with working at the visitor centers, working with school groups, giving programs like hikes or different evening programs or different things like that. Historically, and still now today, they call those interpretive rangers. And the word of like my career is I'm in interpretation. But some people tease me and say, "Does that mean you're interpreting nature or what?" But it is a more historical word about education. So our basic rule is, or basic, I guess, job is educating the visitors to keep, the park as safe as possible, but then, of course, educating them about the inner workings of the national park.
Well, and I think interpretive is something that's unique to parks in general, because you don't hear that a lot in other avenues and other industries or things like that, because there is so many ways to be able to interpret what you see when you get out into nature and into these parks.
Yes, yeah. And there's actually a National Association of Interpretation, and when you go to those conferences, which I've presented at and gone to before, they really do include a lot of our agencies, so a lot of things like national parks, state parks, national forests, but then also nature centers, zoos, different things. So we all are in that field of interpretation. It's just not something that I think the general public understands what that means.
Well, and Sally, you said that your title was management specialist. So does that mean you're the numbers chick?
Not necessarily, but I can interpret some of those numbers.
There you go. So, what does that mean? What do you do with the park system?
Well, I work for the superintendent. I'm in the superintendent's office, so I help with all sorts of different tasks. And one of my tasks is a liaison with the tourism industry in this area. So I keep track of just things that are going on in the surrounding communities. I go to some of the tourism meetings, and we all try to work together to support the park, and then this park would like to support our neighbors as well.
Well, and I know that, from my relationships with Katie, with Felicia, with a lot of the other tourism directors, they depend on you a lot to tell them who's coming, how many of them are coming, where are they originally coming from, because they need increases in their budgets to justify different things and to be able to show this is the kind of money that tourists are bringing in to our different communities.
Yeah, and Shenandoah is like a magnet. We get people from all over the world that come here, international visitors, local visitors, all over the United States. And last year we had 1.46 million visitors come to Shenandoah.
Wow.
And 2016, it was just a little less, like 1.458 million visitors. So the last 2 years, the whole Park Service in general has seen record-breaking numbers of people coming to the parks. And part of that we attribute to the 100th anniversary of the Park Service, which was in 2016. And the numbers stayed high the next year. And we attribute a lot of that to an advertising campaign that was put on called the Find Your Park campaign.
I've seen that.
And it was a wonderful campaign, and it was a national and international campaign that just got the word about parks out there. And of course,
Lots of people found their parks.
Yeah, that's right.
and we were hoping, that they would come to the national parks, but also state parks, county parks, city parks, just whatever open area is around you. Go and check it out, because you're bound to love it.
So how do you know necessarily where some of these people are coming from? I mean, they do, because they come through the gate, I guess.
Yes.
Do you ask them? Do you check license plates?
No, we actually do visitor surveys every few years, and through those surveys that we hand out that are optional, that they don't have to answer the questions, but many of them do because they want to help support us, that's where we get our information about what countries they come from, what are their age groups, and what are their interests, things like that. So we only find out that information through surveys.
But you guys really do keep a ton of information. I mean, I've heard Felicia tell me in various conversations how far down you can drill in some cases to tell her.
Yeah, so we have a part of the Park Service that takes our data from our entrance stations, and they can do statistics. And they go out and they can calculate the economic impact of all the national parks. They go out 60 miles from those parks and all the cities and communities in that area, and they can determine how many dollars that these visitors are spending, the average visitor, because everybody has to get to our park through the gateway communities, through the roads that bring them there, and they're spending money. 1.4 million people can't come and stay in Shenandoah. They can't all buy gas, and they can't all eat in Shenandoah. So they're doing that in the surrounding areas, buying food, buying gas, spending the night, eating in restaurants, buying souvenirs. And so what they found for Shenandoah this last year, $95.8 million was spent in those local communities within 60 miles of Shenandoah.
Wow. And I think a lot of times that goes unnoticed from the people who live in those communities. We all get annoyed. Okay, it's peeper season. The bridges are going to be backed up. Traffic is going to be a mess. But we don't really realize what, financial benefit we're getting from that. Justin was here, and we had talked about the financial impact of tourism as a whole. And I think he had broken down the numbers in the Winchester Frederick County community that it saves taxpayers $370 some odd a year that they don't have to pay to cover all of these other expenses because tourists pick up that tab. If they didn't have the park, because they're within 60 miles of your entrance, that number would be substantially higher.
Yeah. So it's a great dollar income for people. It also, the park supports many jobs. So this visitor study that they did calculated that about at least 1,200 jobs in these local communities are directly related to the park.
Well, and then there's the little things like the Appalachian Trail. I mean, Emily, you mentioned, the Appalachian Trail runs through the park. There are tons of hikers that hike that trail, and they don't always go from one end to the other. They could do it in pieces or in segments. Those are people that randomly then come into these different towns because they need to eat, they need a shower, they need a place to stay.
Yes, definitely. And any of those kind of hikers or backpackers or anybody are also bringing people into the surrounding areas, because sometimes they send their goods ahead of time, and sometimes their families come to meet them, for different things. So there's that part of it that is not even just that specific hiker. It's also the whole community that hiker brings with them.
Well, and I think sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle of conversations with Shenandoah National Park, too, because we all tend to think Skyline Drive. That, we forget that there's a park. Mm-hmm. We think of Skyline Drive, and we don't really always think, okay, wait a minute, Skyline Drive is in the park. Mm-hmm. It's all kind of one big thing. But, Emily, in your PowerPoint that you had put together, you had all these different statistics for how many waterfalls, how many hiking trails. It boggled my mind. I wasn't, because even I was thinking, well, it's just the drive.
No, we have 500 miles of trails, and that is something that I think people are surprised by, because a lot of times they do just think of the Appalachian Trail or certain of their favorite trails. Mm-hmm. But 500 miles, 100 of those miles are horseback riding trails, and 101 miles of that are the Appalachian Trail. So, those are all part of those 500 miles. And then waterfalls, that's a very popular thing for people to go hiking to. Mm-hmm. Although I always caution people for waterfalls, most of the time you're going down to the waterfall, which is easy.
And then you have to go back out.
That is the hardest.
How much work are you willing to put in for that perfect Instagram photo?
You have to think about because the peaks are going up and then coming down, and the waterfalls are going down and then coming back up. So which one do you want to do first? Which one do you want to do second? Right. But we have over 90 streams, and most of those have some version of cascades or, and pools, of course, with the cascades, and then waterfalls. So it is really popular, especially when it's hot, to go towards those areas. I will tell you the most popular one is Dark Hollow Falls, because it's the shortest hike to a waterfall.
Okay, I like that one already.
And that's a steep hike, though.
But people say it's 0.7 of a mile down, but it feels like 7 miles back up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's steep.
And you guys, that's the other cool thing about what you do, is there are people that are at the different locations that can say, what is your skill level? Mm-hmm. And you can advise them and give them some advice. If it's somebody like me who doesn't really, I want to say that I want to hike, but I really want to do is just walk slow.
Yes.
I don't want to climb anything. I don't want to go down. I just want to take a walk through the woods. Yes. You guys know what all of these trails are and can say, okay, if you're not all that experienced of an actual hiker, here are some places to go.
And that's what, first of all of that is on our website, too, that even breaks it down
wonderful.
That way also. But yes, definitely coming to any of our visitor centers or any of our contact stations. And I literally was just answering that right before coming here, where a couple came in and said, we want to go for a short hike. This person had an illness that she couldn't walk very far, but she wanted to be out in the woods. So I was able to give her an opportunity, of some, or ideas of some trails that she could do that were not very high in elevation and not very much elevation change. And so that's something that we work really hard at, knowing our trails, knowing our visitors by asking them questions to get them to those right trails. We don't ever want to send them out on something that they're not going to enjoy, or something that's going to cause them to have an accident or something
that
like that.
You then have to send a rescue crew in for, because that would be me. That would
pretty
be me.
much ruin their vacation too. So we do want them to enjoy, and that's something as an educator, I would say that's probably one of our biggest things. Is we definitely want to protect our park, but we also really work hard to make sure our visitors enjoy their visit, are safe during their visit, and are able to connect to the park. So that would be, I'd say, as an interpreter, we were asking that earlier, is a very important part of it.
Now, do you find there's sometimes a disconnect between, I want to go to the park, I want to walk through the woods, I want to experience nature, but they may forget that means nature is bears, nature is deer, nature is mosquitoes, all these other things. So you kind of have to make sure that they understand fully what it is they're getting themselves into, even if they're just going to take a walk.
Yes, and that's something that's part of, when we're talking to them at the visitor center or on the phone or wherever, we do usually try to go over a few of those things, especially if the person seems inexperienced or, tells us they come from a place that they've never done anything like this, so we're going to give them more information and more safety concerns, based off of what we can read of them and what they tell us, but that's also because we also learn to ask questions that will help us get to those right answers.
Well, and that's a big deal, because a lot of people don't realize they think it's going to be so cool if they see a bear and don't really think of, I only know because I'm married to a hunter and I have spent some time in the woods to know that if you see, a sow with her cubs, there are certain things you do and you don't do versus if you see, something else, making sure that everybody understands it's not Yogi Bear.
And that's what, it is a fine balance. I think we all are, any of us that are visitors and also that work there, of getting excited to see those wildlife, because to me, it is amazing to see a bear. Like I've seen a lot of bears in my life, and I still get so excited about a bear. And it's really neat to share that with a visitor when they see their first bear, and they, but you do also have to remind them, and that is not just up to me, it's up to anybody that sees the people getting too close, that, anything within 150 feet, you're way too close to that bear. And that's the minimum. You want to give them even more than that if possible. And deer, people don't realize deer are scary animals too. They have horns.
Yeah,
Can't believe I just
antlers.
said horns. That's one of my pet
So
peeves.
gonna get in
They
trouble.
have antlers, and hooves that are very sharp. So those are definitely things. And we have had deer charge people because they're too close, especially when they have their fawns or different things like that. So.
It makes it kind of, I told you guys before we came on the air, we have a cabin up in Fort Valley, and it sits on 12 acres surrounded by the national forest. And we have trail cameras everywhere because it's a hunting lodge. But we've been up there on weekends, and we've had bear come into the yard. We've had deer walk no further from me than, you are sitting right now. And it's, I'm not going to pet it because they've got bugs, and that's the other thing. These are not Bambis. But
you'd be surprised how many people think that.
That's what always amazes me.
Want to put the fawn that was left by its mom, want to put it in their car and bring it to the visitor center, which has happened.
To try to help it when
and
it's kind of misguided.
It was a baby bison, and so, I worked in Everglades, and we had visitors trying to put their kids on the back of the alligators that were laying there basking in the sun, because they thought either one, they were statues, or two, they were tame because they weren't doing anything. Right. But that's what an alligator does, it basks in the sun. Wow. And so we had to, I remember one lady, and specifically I said, do not put your person or your kid on the back of an alligator. And she's like, what, you're letting the alligators run around here with my children? These wild alligators? And we're like, well, actually, it's the other way around. But so people just at times don't realize these are wild animals, even if they seem more docile. And so I would say that was one of our biggest safety concerns in the park.
Well, and that's just it, because you're right. There could be somebody who's coming from the city who thinks, well, it's a park, so they must be tame, they must be pets, they must be used to seeing people because so many people come through here. So it's going to be perfectly fine for me to walk over and try to pet this animal. And that is not at all okay ever.
No.
And that's got to be one of the tough things. That's kind of the down and dirty tips and tricks from, a park ranger. You should do a blog of,
There have been books written about all of those kind of things. So.
Well, and it does. It gets, and that's one of the things where it kind of sucks too, because you guys do everything in your power to make sure people are educated. You want them to have a good time. You want them to be safe. But you can't account for everything.
No.
And there are going to be situations, and even people who know and understand. I would like to think that if I'm out in the woods and come into a situation, that my husband has taught me well enough what to do in some situations. But you can't predict everything either. No. So you could be far enough away from a bear and turn and think, okay, I'm just going to move away. And the next thing you know, it's an animal.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of a, I don't want to say joke, because I don't want to say that we're joking about our visitors, but at times we feel that they leave their common sense sometimes behind. And that is all of us. I have been that person when I visited another national park, that I did something that I was like, why did I just do that, Emily? Come on, I know. So I think it's trying to just use your knowledge, use what you know about wild animals, use your resources, learn about your area that you're going to be in, so trying to, use that common sense, but I guess not check it out when you come into the park.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, and along with that, there are other things too. One of the things that you've got on your rules to remember is fire. That's a big deal, because depending on, I know we've had like 3,000 feet of rain in the last couple of months, but those are things that people have to be aware of if they're doing campsites. You only allow fires in grills, fire pits, at campgrounds, and in picnic areas. So if somebody's camping, they can't just clear a little space away and build themselves a campfire.
Oh,
No,
right.
no, yeah.
Definitely avoid that.
Yeah.
So yeah, you need to be able to just use that in our designated campgrounds and our designated picnic areas. And then we also occasionally have campfire programs where we'll have campfires. But a lot of that, and maybe Sally can speak to that, but a lot of that is more for safety concern.
Oh, it's totally about safety and wildfires. Because in Shenandoah, unfortunately, 85% of our wildfires are caused by humans.
Ugh.
Only 15% are natural, which would be lightning.
Lightning.
So that's why we have to have these more strict rules in the backcountry, just because we can't afford any wildfires.
Well, and it's been several years now, but there was a big fire in the park. It's been, like I said, several years ago that we had Warren County Fire and Rescue had to respond to. There were evacuations for people that were living, on the park borders and things like that. It gets scary. The other thing you guys have to kind of pay attention to are the roads. We do have Skyline Drive. So I know I see a lot of times on Twitter, on your website, or on Facebook that you've closed a portion of Skyline Drive because maybe it's snow or there's fog or there's things like that. Yeah. Those are things that people also need to be aware of.
And that's why it's really important to check our website or the Facebook page before you come, just to make sure that the drive is open. Because it might be better weather down here, but the weather could be much worse because you're talking a 2,000 or 3,000 foot difference in elevation at the higher summits where Skyline Drive could be icy up there, but it's not down here. So definitely check before you come.
Yeah,
Even just when we had the hurricane just, 2 weeks ago, there were portions of the drive closed due to, which was surprising to some people, but we were dealing more with downed trees because of the saturation of both the trees and the ground. And that is not something that people down in the valley, always deal with, or people coming from other areas. So those kind of things come up last minute that we don't always realize will be a safety concern.
It can also be windier at the higher elevations too. So that was what was bringing the trees down up there, but it wasn't as windy down here.
Yeah, and people here even think, okay, well, it's crappy everywhere else, but I live in Front Royal. I'm just going to go out on the drive for a while. I'm going to go take some pictures of like the fog on the mountains or things like that. And they don't think about what could be where they're going, not so much where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we usually tell people that it's like 10 to 15 degrees cooler up there. And, the clouds definitely sit on the mountain way more than they do in the valley. And to just take your time. Just take your time. And we always check Facebook when we send people, just because, you guys do an excellent job of posting if, there's a portion closed or if there's a trail closed for whatever reason, things like that. So it's wonderful.
So, Emily, you do these workshops. You've done them in a couple different locations. You're hoping to be able to do one here in Front Royal in the spring, but the peeper season is among us, so that makes it a little more complicated. Do you hope to do those multiple times a year in all of the different localities?
What our goal originally was to try to do all the surrounding counties at least once right now, and then get all of the contact information of the people that do attend so that we could contact them for the future for updates into the answer book. So it might not be that we're always doing workshops, but there was talk about expanding it to where we would invite people up to the park and do a version of a tour or something also as the second step of these kind of workshops. That might be, in the making in the future. But it was at least an idea is to continue on if we can with these kind of things. I will caution, as anything, it has to do with staffing and
budgets and all of that fun
things,
stuff.
Yeah, but I feel fortunate that we were able to do what we were able to do so far just this past few months, and that we're, like I said, looking forward to. We have Front Royal, we have another one in Luray. We're working with Greene County to have one in the spring also. So we're slowly getting around the park trying to get those communities involved.
So, Katie, all of the 25 people that came to the workshop that you guys did walked away with one of these binders.
Yes, or they were getting one. I'm not sure if you had enough when you brought them.
I did have enough. I know a few took more than one because of based off of where they might be located. Like one of someone was there from some of the cabins, so he took enough
to put in each of his different cabins.
So yes, and that's where getting contact information helps us be able to get those binders to people if they weren't able to get them at any of the workshops.
And I think they're going to be incredibly helpful because they really kind of are like a guidebook, more or less, for people to be able to see this is what to do, this is where to go, here are some things that you should know ahead of time. So being able to reach out and make those partnerships is going to be really valuable, I think, going forward.
Absolutely. And, we send people to the park all the time. The park sends people down to us all the time. It's just good to continue to build that relationship.
Awesome. Are we done?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say one of the most favorite questions that I had from my little national park quiz was about the different national parks.
It wasn't about the bathrooms?
It wasn't about the bathrooms, but I didn't know if I could ask or ask some national park trivia.
Okay.
As a quick ending.
Go
if that's
ahead.
okay.
Yeah, let's see.
So one of my questions I asked, well, I showed some pictures of some national parks, and I talked to them about, the different types like Yosemite, Yellowstone, Gettysburg National Battlefield, the Blue Ridge Parkway, different things. And I asked, what is the most visited national park out of the 417 that we have in the United States?
I would guess it
know?
would be Yellowstone.
I was going to guess Yosemite. Is it Shenandoah
I know
National
the
Park?
answer, so
Sally knows the answer. So the answer actually, when you're just talking about the basic national parks, which is 60 of them that have the name national park at the end, that would be Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
Nuh-uh.
And they get up to 11 million of visitors a year.
Wow.
And when you start going down and after that, so after that is number 1. Number 2 would be Grand Canyon.
Oh, yeah.
And that's about
Should have guessed that one. That one actually
4 or 5 million a year. So that's a pretty big difference between
Right.
number 1 to number 2. And then number 3 and 4 kind of go back and forth. And there was some new ones that came in the last few years. So it's Yellowstone, Yosemite, and then Zion and Bryce also were coming up into there. Now that's just when you're talking about national parks. But when you start, and I noticed you just pulled out that
Yes.
site, or I have a PowerPoint slide that shows that we have a bunch of different national park units that make up the 417, like national parkways, national battlefields, national historic sites, national monuments, national rivers, national lake shores, all of those. When you add all of those in, actually it's the parkways that end up being the most visited. And so that would be the Blue Ridge Parkway, George Washington Parkway in DC, and then also Golden Gate National Recreation Area out in California. So so it's just kind of little quick trivia to think about that, where and how do these visitation trends happen, and why does the Smokies get so many,
Versus, yeah.
But
well, and
I
there,
will say, if you look at it in the long run, we really, in this region that is surrounding Shenandoah, we are getting the most visitation in general because we have, the Smokies, we have Blue Ridge Parkway, we have George Washington, we have Washington, D.C., which all of those monuments are national parks, and then we have Shenandoah, and all of us, really do work a lot with our tourists that come to the United States.
So the national parks, actually, the National Park Service also, because you've got on this list preserves, reserves, recreation areas, that all falls under whatever national park that may be in it, right? How does...
No, these are all separate sites.
Okay.
They are all separate sites. Some national parks will work together. Like if they're a really small site, they might have another, like we work with...
like Cedar Creek.
Bell Grove.
Okay.
Bell
National
Grove
Historic
is
Site.
right nearby, so our superintendent is superintendent of both of those national park sites. But they do have their own separate staff, and they have their own separate, budgets and different things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but interesting, like national monuments are something that presidents can designate, while national parks have to be an act of Congress. So there is some different ways that these different designations are designated, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think because there have been some things in the news in the last year and a half about monuments that are not going to be designated or that are now being removed from, that sort of thing. So I never really understood how all that worked and who got to make those decisions. So that's kind of interesting to know. And I never really thought about Gettysburg. I always thought about Gettysburg as the battlefield. I never really thought about it being a park.
And Manassas, which is closer to us here, that's also a national battlefield. So that's under the National Park Service, too. And like I mentioned, every monument in D.C. is actually a national park of their own, their own little site. So, but then they all work together as part of the capital, the National Capital region as part of that whole section. But any of you that like passport stamps, which is a really neat thing that lots of national park or goers do, you can get a separate national park stamp at every single national monument, which
That's
to me, for
awesome.
someone who's obsessed with that, I'm like, woo, I can get a bunch of different.
That's so cool.
I'm going to go into D.C. for the day and get 15 different
There you
stamps.
go. Exactly.
I think it's awesome. I've learned a lot from this. I'm really glad that I'm going to thank you for, sending me the
I really
original
think
email.
It's the opposite. I think they brought me.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have known about this if you hadn't sent me the
okay.
email from the chamber.
Well,
So
I'm
we'll
happy to help.
start. Yes. And actually, that might have been Gina. So I'm not even going to be able to give you credit.
Well,
But-
we want to say thank you to all of our communities for always supporting us and always wanting to work with us. And we are, wanting to move forward in that engagement. And that was really what these are all about, is trying to work more with our communities and get more, tools and resources out there for everybody to use.
Absolutely. So we're going to end this After the Show podcast with the simple line that you should go and find your park.
Love it.
Yeah,
Sounds
and
great.
it's not even that far from here. That's
exactly.
perfect. Ladies, thank you guys for coming. I appreciate you coming to do the show and then hanging out for a little bit and getting into the weeds, so to speak, a little bit more.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.